Often I am asked, how do we get that lovely patterned look on my kit boats, canoes, etc. Simply what we use from any dress fabric shop is polyester fabric, the type of fabric that you might make a Hawaiian beach shirt out, for instance. Now what we do is we get the material and we lay it along the side of the boat. I don't do the bottom, simply because the bottom gets scratched and it's easier to match the paint with to cover the scratches rather than try and do another coat of cloth, which you may not get the same pattern. So the boat has been entirely coated with epoxy resin, including the tape seams, etc. So having done that, we lay the cloth on the bottom edge, the edge of the bottom and the lower strake. That is the only place where we actually coat the marine plywood underneath before tacking the cloth onto it. And once we go along from one end to the other, and at times you might have to put a little weight on your cloth to stop it slipping off, but once you've done that edge, the extreme bottom, which in this case is the top edge, it will hold in place. Then working from the centre of the boat, 2 people is ideal. In this case my wife and myself. She worked in one direction and I worked in the other, using a paintbrush, which I find is a lot better. We then painted onto and through the fabric until we got a good coat of it on there. You'll notice there's some places here where it looks light and dark. It's drying in different areas, and the light from the camera and the different lights make it look blotchy, but that will turn out quite fine. Having done that bottom strake, the lower strake, then we move on to do the upper strake, which in this case, being upside down, is towards the bottom. Now, because you've only got 25 minutes of work time at 25 degrees, which we're working on today, I mix them up in those small containers. There's I used about 800 ml altogether. So we use one container and then we will mix up a new container. That way we get better usage out of the material. There is a little bit of extra noise here today because it is raining on a tin roof, but I've put a bit of a muffler on top of the microphone, which might help. Now there are several reasons why it is good to use this procedure, this process. Firstly, you don't have to paint your boat. It looks very attractive. Just put a coat of, when it's all dry, put a good coat of varnish or 2-pack clear over it. This stops the epoxy from over a greater period of time. It might tarnish or yellow a little bit. That will avoid that. Secondly, it covers up any of the seams or any little imperfections that may be in the workmanship or the materials. It's sort of a camouflage in a way, but it ends up very, very attractive. And thirdly, it adds strength. Now when we're finished here, and when this dries, we'll just run a knife along that upper shear edge, and we'll come back and have a look at see what the job is when that's done. Okay, now that this is starting to set, I can just simply go along with a pair of scissors and cut it away, and it'll be tidied up, and an outer gunnel will then just be screwed on over it. Of course we'll have a coat of 2-pack or varnish to bring a lovely shine up. At this stage it might look a little blotchy because it does tend to dry in places, but once we take this off, but that's basically all we do. Did you press the button? Okay. Oh, you didn't. Okay, what we do now that this is dry, or it's partially dry, we just go along and gradually just cut it off with a pair of scissors. and then we will fit an outer gunnel on it later on. Don't be worried about it looking a bit blotchy, because as this resin dries, this epoxy resin dries, it seems to dry in places a bit at a time, but after 24 hours it is all the one colour, and then we just hit it with a coat of a marine varnish or 2-pack. There we are. Now, having removed the excess fabric away from the shear line of this vessel, it's now ready to be turned onto the other side at about 45 degrees, and then about 24 hours later we will do the other side, and then we can fit the shear rubbing strips or outer gunnels, and she'll just about be ready to go. Additional information regarding the construction, which is very similar, is also added to this DVD from the Shark Dinghy construction DVD. Follow these procedures with the canoe as well. Now, it's very important here, in your kit you'll have matching pieces like left and right. In this case we have the bottom left and right of a dinghy. Now, with this we should, before we start, put one on top of the other and make sure that they match precisely. They may have come from a different batch and there could be a millimetre here or there. So lay it on top, lay one on top of the other, and just check that they are the same, and just fair off or plane off, sand off any little bit so that they match precisely. After cutting out and applying epoxy to the several parts of the dinghy, we now move on to drilling the holes to take the electrical ties or the stitches. And a good idea for this is, with two parts that are going to be joined together, as in two halves for the bottom, we drill a hole every 400 mils or 4 inches. A good way to do this is to make a little template and then move it along, drilling as you go. This way both sides will be even. Now we'll move on following this. Having drilled the holes along the keel side of the bottom, we now put the stitches, the cable ties, through those holes, but make sure that you leave them very loose because of the bit of a curve as you put it on the boat towards the stem. If you tighten them too tight, then you're only going to have to cut them out and put new ones on. Now, an important note here is, when you start doing this, make sure that you're along the straightest edge, because it's so easy just to start stitching along the chine thinking that that's the keel. So then you've got to cut all your ties out and start again. So we'll move on to the next part of the journey. Now you can see at this point what we've done. We've laid it in a cradle and put, so it's in its right position. I've put the little bow stem section in, and you'll note there I've created some epoxy wood by mixing sawdust. It makes a nice firm joint, and then that little bit of fiberglass will go over the top of that, and then seam glass will go along it. So we'll move on to the next section now. After stitching the centre seam down the keel with the cable ties, I sit the bottom sections on a cradle that will be shown in a drawing, and forcing the front together, I've applied the little stem nose section, and you'll find in places where there is a slight gap, what I use is sawdust mixed in with the resin, and that creates a very strong bond, and stronger than the timber itself. And then that is covered by that small piece of fiberglass tape there, and then later on there'll be another whole seam of tape in between each stitch, allowing us to remove the stitches, and then a 6-ounce cloth tape will be applied. So we'll move on to the next section.